All right, and we are off. Hope everyone had a good 4th of July. It's nice of the weather to hang out for a split second to let us get outside a little bit. All right, so we're in the past, this has actually last week has kind of been the last lecture, and then it's just been go collect data for a couple weeks, and then 2 weeks of presentations. But with a smaller class and fewer people in clinics and doing a little bit more traditional, I decided to have a conversation this week. We'll skip next week and then come back the last week of class to do some presentations. And with the different places that people are and the different type of data that people are collecting and the different types of final projects that people were doing, I'm less concerned about the presentation aspect of this semester, but I'll get you guys some clear directions for each different configuration about what my expectations are, what I'd like to see from you guys for both the final project and in that last week. So class tonight, no class next week, and then we will come back on the 20th. Is that right? For our last night, and then all assignments will be due on the 28th, July 28th. And grades get back to you guys by, I think, August 2nd. So quick sprint to the finish here. And it's a nice, easy, relaxed summer semester. And I think that this class embodies that quite well. All right, so for this class, kind of given what I just said, with this being our last kind of content night, I want to focus on kind of how you guys see putting this whole picture of assessment together. We have covered a lot of different types of assessment, critical attributes of assessment, function of assessment. We've gone over quite a lot in a pretty short period of time about kind of procedurally how things should work on an individual level. But how do we, both from a clinical perspective and from a school perspective, how do we put the whole thing together? How do we on a daily basis use all of these assessments in a meaningful way? Not just what are we supposed to do with them, but what does that actually look like in a functional space? And with where you guys are now, clinic and schools, do you feel that there are any assessment practices that you currently engage in that are non-functional? And if so, how can those be changed? If they can't be changed procedurally, like you still have to give the thing, how can you take the thing that is not meaningful to you and make it meaningful? So I'll type some of these questions out in the chat box, but I want you guys to take maybe like 10 minutes and get some answers on paper, and then we'll come back and discuss all of them. All right. So let's start at the simple, or the kind of the smaller level. So the first question is are any of your current assessments not functional? And if so, how can you make them more functional. So define them, talk a little, whatever the non-functional or major non-functional pieces are, really hone in on that and how to make it functional. Given all the different types of assessment, spell assessment right, how can we actually use all of these in a meaningful way in day-to-day activities? All right, so those are the two like broader questions that I want you guys to think about. I want you to answer these like specific to your setting, your classroom, your clients, your school, your purpose. So really stepping back from, we talked about moment-to-moment assessments. We talked about global assessments. We talked about formative and summative assessment. We talked about all these different components, but what does that mean for the big picture? All right, sound good? Okay, so it's 5:13 now. I'll come back right around 5:25, so 12-ish minutes. Take your time. I'll pause the recording and we'll see what we come up with, okay? All right. Okay, so I see, thank you for the couple that posted. Let's go ahead and talk about some responses. So who wants to, of those who posted, who would like to share? Let's start with number one. Non-functional assessments, how can you make them more functional? So Serena, I think that's you. No non-functional assessments. That's, you're lucky if that's the case for you. Talk a little bit about that. On the diagnostician side, and things being, just because something's norm referenced, I don't want you to think that gives it a free pass in terms of functionality. But talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, what you put in the chat.
Did you say me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm at my son's baseball game. Sorry, they made it to the
No worries. No worries.
So, I mean, I work at the district level with 504. So the only assessments that I work with are the ones to qualify kids for 504 plans.
Yeah.
So that's the function of them. But to say that it adjusts instruction or anything like that, other than test read aloud or extended time or calculator use, I definitely think they could be more functional, but that's the function of them, is to qualify them for 504.
Yeah, and I think that's where that second part that you're talking about, that's what I really think that you have the opportunity to be thinking about is, okay, is the function just to qualify for a 504, for a disability, for something like that? Or is it to identify meaningful interventions that might actually support the child? Like if you give an assessment and they qualify for extended time, but then we don't see any change in scores or behaviors or anything of interest as a result of that extended time, I'm not saying that the assessment isn't valid, but the function of what we're truly looking for in giving assessment kind of goes out the window. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. So, moving further on into the SBLC process, it would be nice if the assessments could help them maybe with tutoring or to bring up weaknesses or things like that. That would be nice. But as the kids get older, especially, for one example, one of the high schools has 180 kids that are on 504 plans.
Mm-hmm.
So basically all they can do is just renew. They don't have time to really do anything other than just to renew the 504 plan. So
I think going through the motions takes the entire year.
Right. At 180 kids, when it's a classroom teacher,
Yeah.
It's like, and I know it's a problem that I know every district, every school faces, but I wish I had the answer on what to do with that part. But
And I think, you know, as you move up and some of you will find yourselves in more central office administrative roles down the line and in touch with the State Department and how they make decisions, being able to kind of critically review and understand the research on the assessments, what the assessments actually say about themselves and how they should be used. Those are things that we will have impact in and be able to make decisions about in our lives, right? And in our lives and our careers, and being able to think critically, like a lot of I feel that the problem that we're circling around here is that a lot of administrators feel like the purpose of that assessment is to qualify a kid for services, not necessarily to help the kid. Like there's an assumption that the service that they are qualifying for will actually help them, when we could spend the time looking more in depth at specific interventions, specific deficits that can be helped without kind of check the box. I don't even want to call it interventions, but supports. I don't know, maybe that's a little too preachy, but that's definitely
yes,
how I feel.
for sure that does happen more at like the elementary level, but then less when they get to middle school, and then
Yeah,
even less to almost, I hate
no,
to say non-existent when they get to
yeah,
high school, but you'd have to have somebody who was really fighting for it at the high school level for it to see it happen on an individual basis.
yeah.
But I'm like, there's like, one of the main issues is kids that move around a lot. They
Mhm.
often get missed in the SBLC process. So kind of that's what I like to fight for, is whenever I see a child who has no services, I'll bring it to the school's attention, and then I'll offer to do the assessments and try to see what we can do to make sure the kid gets what they qualify for.
Yeah.
But
And
you
I
know,
think that like I love that that's the like where your passion and your focus are. And those are the kids where I think that what you're doing is great. Like, let's just show that they do actually qualify for something. What you mentioned before, the like automatic renewals, that's the type of thing that grinds me the wrong way, you know, where it's like you qualified before, we're basically assuming that we failed and that you still qualify, right? It's not even going into it to see, did our support you enough so that you no longer need that support, and that's not even a question that's being asked, let alone a procedure for going through that type of assessment.
and I have to say too, like, not every district for sure is the same. Like, all districts work 504 differently. Some districts I think have more manpower, more time, more training, like smaller districts maybe, but my district is such a big district that, we'd like to do more than just make it through to the next year. But you have attrition, there's just like so many factors that are involved in it too.
I think that at the smaller district level, they have the opposite problem where they still have the same percentage of students, not the same numbers of students, same percentage of students, but then even getting a diagnostician is the challenge, like a single diagnostician. And then in a lot of those districts, you are talking about small population, but geographically very, very large. So getting to remote areas to do assessments is a challenge. So I think that appropriate assessment at the diagnostic level, administering assessments as they were intended to be administered is one thing. Being able to use them in meaningful ways is a very different one that I think everyone has some experience or contact with. But no, I very much appreciate that perspective. Thank you. Good. All right, who's next up? Allison, what do you got?
Um, I think I agree with things that Selena said too. And I think as a resource teacher, I do have the advantage where I can use those assessments to build individual plans for these students, and teach them on their instructional level. I
Mhm.
think, I know we've talked about it before. I think SLTs is a non-functional
Yep.
thing. We
Yep.
need norm things based on the norms, and that's all we get from it. So it's like, okay, this kid is below average.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do I need to teach them?
Yeah.
Um, so it's like if we could get exactly what they missed and things like that, it would be more useful.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm racking my brain. I know I like tried to stretch it in the last conversation. But like I said, I think at Max, it was the same conversation where the principal was just like, they suck, but we have to give them, and there's nothing we can do. Yeah, no, yeah, I got nothing. So given that, and I'm reading your chat as well, talk a little bit about the process that you would prefer to see instead. And I will say that, changing as few characteristics as possible, what would make something give you the same information that you're currently getting plus more in a more functional way? What do you think?
if we had all the time in the world and I could watch each kid take the test and see which answers they're getting right and wrong,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
that
I mean, I'm surprised that you're not able to get more of a breakdown. Because that to me is where the missed opportunity is, right? Like, it's fine if you get an aggregate score, if you know that, okay, all my students struggled in multi-step word problems, and that's something that I as a teacher need to focus on.
right.
Yeah.
And I think to the like thinking back, I also wrote about like assessments given by the ed diagnostician for their evaluations. That too, we don't exactly, I mean, sometimes in their report, they'll talk about their strengths and weaknesses and stuff, but yeah, making sure it's more detailed so that we know where to focus our IEP goals on and things
Mhm.
like
Yeah, I know, on the clinical side of things, the equivalent is when we get a diagnostic report from a referring physician, and it's a diagnosis of autism, and it's like, here are all the recommendations. And some of those times, the recommendations are stock recommendations, and we're going to do what we want with that. But the value is in the level of detail of the report itself, right? So if we can know specific scores in a specific domain, that's something we can do something with. And yeah, it requires us to have some understanding of the background, but as a classroom teacher, if you are familiar with and comfortable with the language in the ed diagnostician report, then you two can talk the same language,
that.
It's not the diagnosticians should be able to talk the classroom language. It's incumbent on the teachers to be able to talk the diagnostician language as well, and then you can have that robust conversation. No, I think that would be huge. Awesome.
Yeah, one of the things that I've like done with like when I've received, because I've been given just like the assessment, and I'm like, okay, great, I'm reading the assessment. But one thing that I've really really tried to hone in on this year is having that a collaborative piece, like collaborating with the diagnostician, the school psych, and really breaking the assessment, the things that they assess down, so it can help me just formulate better IEP goals that are more, that align with where the child is developmentally,
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that that step between diagnostic eval and diagnostic assessment. Maybe if we use that language, that's the right way to look at it, right? Like there's a very big difference between an evaluative report and an assessment report. And maybe I'm splitting hairs there, but Selena, what you're talking about with like, yes, they qualify. That's evaluation. That's not assessment. And teachers need the assessment component to make informed decisions about where to go. It's like same on our side, I say our side, on the clinical side. I know the kid has autism. Great. Where in the domains do we need support? I don't need your evaluation. I need your assessment. I need the subtest scores and things like that, so I can go from there.
One thing that a problem that I've seen with the assessments that I've been handed to is when I probe the specific when I probe specific the STOs, the child already has these in repertoire, but the assessment says otherwise. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting. So I mean that then it has, we have to go back. We go back and forth, with that dialogue. Where, well, this is the data that I'm collecting. I've been collecting it, for 5 days, and it's to mastery now.
So what are some reasons that we see that pattern? Because that shows up all the time. It not from in a gen ed classroom. You'll teach something, and then they'll take a state test and miss it. So what's your explanation for that, or understanding of that?
Yeah, I assume that a lot of these things have to do with lack of instructional control. That could be one. Maybe the diagnostician has now been paired as a reinforcer with the child. So I think that's also important. Yeah, one of the things is I've also noticed that whenever, I've seen this firsthand. I've seen children get really nervous when they're pulled out by someone that's new and they're being, they're given an assessment. And I've noticed that they get super, super nervous. And I know it's really not ABA terms, test anxiety, but you could definitely see the behavior, the child's behavior is changing. However, if I deliver it, I think that would get better. We would get a more accurate, baseline data.
And it's interesting when you look at validity measures for some of these assessments, a lot of them don't have that conversation of whether the administrator is a known administrator or an unknown administrator. But I think we all know that is going to have an impact on student outcomes. Good. Heather, you went in a different direction, and I super appreciate that and value that. Are you still there? Just saw you a second ago.
Yeah, my camera's all kinds of wacky.
Okay, cool. So Heather's you're talking here about a specific assessment for a specific skill. And I like how you singled that out. Taking this as more of like a pre-test, post-test. Can you try to think of it less specific to intensive tact, and how do you view what do you view the general issue to be there? Does that make sense? That question makes sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking more of the interval term of things, I guess, for this client.
So what in that assessment, when you have a limited interval to capture spontaneous or data that's occurring at a frequency, how what might that be equivalent to on other types of assessments? I'm not sure. I'm trying to lead you to an answer. I'm not sure I'm asking the question. the right way.
I mean, I have noticed that the motivating operation isn't always in place, and different environments have different.
Okay.
I don't know
Okay.
exactly where I'm going with that, but
Okay. Yeah. So for the I'll come back to that in a second, but because I think that addresses a concurrent issue. But when you're talking about the length of the interval for something like that, to me, that's the equivalent of asking a limited number of questions, either in a limited number of ways, or you're not capturing the true nature of the skill. And that actually relates to what you're talking about with reinforcement and motivating operations. It's possible that we could, given more opportunities, we could capture those data more accurately, right?
right.
And I think that's on any assessment that I'm not making or involved in. That's always my biggest concern is, are we setting the child up in a way to get an accurate representation of what they are capable of? That's, and you know, with Isaac, what you're talking about, Allison, you're going in a little bit different direction, but that's the big thing for me is, have we given this child an opportunity and the conditions that are meaningful, that are going to allow for the child to clearly, or to respond in ways that they understand how to respond. Isaac, one of the things that I was thinking about for you was just different language for the assessment, right? Does the assessment ask the question that you asked? And very oftentimes that's not the case. But is our assessment even an accurate representation of our instruction? And if not, then our instruction is at fault. Heather, I think what's interesting about something like the intensive tact assessment is, if you put a typical child in a 5-minute setting with social peers, you're not going to go 5 minutes without a tact. You're going to see that behavior. But is our intervention, is our instruction occasioning that behavior to occur at that rate that we are assessing? And that's where I think we fall off. I don't think that our intervention teaches to that assessment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have talked to my LBA about that as well, because his level of verbal behavior is much higher than a lot of the kids he's paired with.
Okay.
So he's manding for the younger kids at the center that do have that behavior. It's just we can't put them in the same environment for long. Getting these assessments done with, I guess, in a setting that he's wanting to be in isn't always feasible in our current situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would be very hesitant to take those data and interpret them with finality. I would look at those limitations and those caveats. I would recognize their presence. So that's good. That's good. So look for ways to make that assessment more functional. It's written on paper what to do, but it's not written in stone. You can modify those things. You can definitely modify them to make them more appropriate for your child. So think about how you can do that in a more functional way. All right.
Okay. And also, I didn't write it down, but I'm kind of thinking of the Vineland, I guess, because I came across my current client. His mom shared data, and then I looked at it, and then it did not match anything that we reported. So I don't know if it's just not transferring over to home, or if that's I don't know.
Yeah, and that's one where the Vineland is a good and a bad, because we don't teach to it directly, and we shouldn't teach to it directly, but we need to understand what it's measuring, and how the things we are doing can have an impact on those scores. If we are teaching math and assessing reading, that's not going to do us any good. But if we are, teaching, and I'm going to fall apart in this analogy faster than I'd like to, but there are ways to, if we're teaching multiplication and assessing in word problems, then that's something that gets a little bit more meaningful, and that's probably a better analogies where we're teaching these specific skills and expecting application. So that's one where it might seem non-functional, but we have this opportunity to adjust our instruction to make the assessment more functional.
Right. And
Yeah,
it
go
kind of
ahead.
gave us an idea of kind of where we need to go with parent training, I guess. Because he does have these skills in repertoire and we have mastered them here, but he has not mastered them with other individuals.
Gotcha. Yeah, then there you go. There's your new goals.
At first I was like, what is this even used for? But it definitely gave us an idea of which way to go with the parents side of things.
Awesome. I love it. Good. Cece, I don't want to leave you out, but I know you're driving. If you have something that you want to add, by all means.
Hi, Dr. Shandman. I guess you can turn the video on. Hi. So there was, let's see, diagnosticians.
Yeah.
They follow, like, ongoing follow the teacher and the student. Sorry, I didn't get that, but maybe that could be part of where we could improve things there, where it's ongoing collaboration, as Isaac was saying, and some others. So you're both working toward meeting the goal that you both created for the student. And then, so they're using me as an inclusion math teacher, and what came to mind was, so I'm going to be teaching business math and math skills. So I'll have a pre and a post assessment. I'll have a pre-assessment and a post test. And then, for example, writing. But so suppose the end of me, but I'm gonna, I don't know. So I'll have to assess those things.
You're breaking up
I
now.
have opportunity to bring groups of students who are in general ed and special ed into my room and work with them based on the assessments, and then create goals and objectives, as everyone is saying, to help students meet those. But I think it's going to be combining ELA and math. I already know that. So yeah.
Awesome. You cut out for a little bit of that second part, but I think you were kind of speaking to what Isaac had been talking about. But your first part, I with the role of the diagnostician for you guys being to work with and follow the teachers and the students and make sure you're progressing and meeting those goals, that is derived from the diagnostic assessment, as we spoke about before. If you, the diagnostician, are producing a report that is able to give you intervention suggestions, then you are already starting from a place of being able to pre-test, post-test, intervene, and do something. If you are just coming from that qualification standpoint, your job's done, right? So I think that discrimination from that perspective is really, really important. Good. Okay. Let's quickly move to the second question. Of how do we integrate all of these pieces into our day? Now, for the diagnostician, this is literally your whole day, right? Your job is diagnostics, assessment, go from there. But Cece, with what you're talking about, it is a significant portion of the job, but I do think that kind of gets at the crux of how we actually start to implement all of these things throughout the day. When you have the ability to follow through and intervene and assess on the intervention, I think that from the diagnostician standpoint, that's where you start to get out of the just here's my report and go, and move into the, okay, I have an evaluation, I have summative assessments, I have formative assessments, I have moment to moment, and I have the whole spectrum, and I can use all of them at different points. So that's awesome. I really like that thought process. So anyone want to share their thoughts on that second question? Allison, you had some stuff written out there. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I talk more as like the resource teacher, that I can use all these assessments to make their individualized instruction. And then also, because I think the hardest thing about my position is having kids on so many different levels. So being able to look at all the students and kind of, okay, where can I focus my whole group instruction if they're all struggling with a certain thing?
I think that is so critical and challenging to when and asked of our SPED teachers and resource teachers daily, right? Is here's your 10 kids who are on 15 different levels, teach one lesson and address all of their needs, right?
Yes.
And I'm hesitant to say this too loud, but the problem with unique learning is that it claims to be able to do that. And that's just not possible.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not. And so when that's what's given to you as the tool,
Mm-hmm.
you're left up the creek without a paddle, right?
Mm-hmm. It's like, this is the easy way. And so,
Yeah,
but deep down, it's
yeah.
like, but is that what we should be doing?
Exactly. And what really bothers me about that is there's a subset of the population that unique can be really, really good for. And I think
Mhm.
it does some great things with some great skills. But do not tell me that hand over hand prompting is mastery. And do
Mhm.
not tell me that my kid who's basically ready for inclusion is being challenged to the degree that they need to be through that curriculum. And that's not differentiation. That's not individualized instruction. That's not giving you, the teacher, the power to analyze and assess exactly what you're talking about. It's saying, here are 15 different ways to teach this lesson, not
Mhm.
here are 15 different ways to teach this skill.
Right.
I'll step down now.
No, yeah. I agree.
What about you, Isaac? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the hardest things for me is, from moving from working in private practice and then going into the public school system, is being handed, a caseload of about 15 students that I service from Head Start all the way to third grade. Is so learning all the different the curriculum for each grade level, and then trying to just identify where the students lie, has been a challenge. And so Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and then inheriting, IEP goals and I think it's been a challenge, but there's been a lot of growth there. uh, but yeah, it's just, but once again, going back, probing some of the IEP goals that were there and just realizing that those goals are already been mastered. Like those should have probably never should have been there in the first place. We should have been, implementing other goals that are more age appropriate, more goals that really align with where the students need to be, and goals that are attainable, I kind of went
Yeah.
off topic, but I mean,
No. But I think um, that's how assessment is speaking to you. That's how this is all coming together for you, is how can we diagnose more precisely so that we can actually do what we need to do. And going into this next year, I hope that you have the ability to kind of critically think about what are some of the tools that you are being given, and even if they're not perfect for you, how can we make them better? How can I use them in more meaningful ways? Good. And Heather, you're saying provide opportunities for these skills throughout the day so the skills remain within the individual's repertoire. I think that, the speaking here to that concept of generalization and assessment for generalization, that's something that I feel that neither clinics nor schools, especially in special education, do particularly well. I think that we have a tendency to focus not just throughout the day, but within a curriculum. We have a tendency to teach a skill and call it good and move on. And we don't use the larger forms of assessment, less formal assessments, to help ensure that our child is actually able to apply those skills. We don't, in behavior analysis, we don't talk a lot about Bloom's taxonomy. We don't talk about different levels of knowledge, but they're there. And just because a child can do the skill doesn't mean they will do the skill, doesn't mean they can use the skill in other settings, doesn't mean they can explain the skill, doesn't mean all these different things that are potentially available to the student. And it is our job to understand the curriculum. Isaac, you're talking about knowledge of Head Start through third grade curriculum. There's a benefit to knowing that, right? There's a benefit to knowing the whole strand of where the student can or will be for a 3 or 4 or 5 year period. And being able to program for generalization in that way is what can define a child's success. If I just take this and take this and take this and take this, that's not meaningful for a student. Now, I think that some curricula go over the top the other way, and just all the curriculum does is provide for building on itself, and it never actually gets down to teaching the skill. It doesn't actually get to the knowledge. But the balance of those two, where we can teach, we can build, we can use, we can revisit, that's what allows us to ensure our children actually can get where they need to be. To me, the how do we put it all together is looking at it to some degree like the stacking Russian dolls, right? Each layer of what we do has a layer of assessment. And one assessment is the pre-test for one thing and the post-test for something else. It's the dependent variable for one thing and the independent variable for another. And we have to understand the relationship that all of these things have to each other. And yes, there is intervention between those, but in the precious little time we have, I would rather assess down to the base skill and then assess back up, as opposed to just teaching everything or teaching nothing, right? Spend your time understanding what it is that you need to teach, and then how to build the skill set, the evaluative set, everything back up until you get to the point where you have confidence that the skill is within the individual's repertoire, that the goals can be met, the prerequisites are present, that you, the teacher, have the information that you need to be informed about where your child actually is. All right, cool. Any last thoughts? All right, awesome. So no class next week. Be looking for an email from me. I'm going to be powering through all sorts of grading, hopefully, this week and into next week. Be looking for an email from me regarding the final projects. There are going to be a couple of different iterations of it. And we'll go from there. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks. All right?
Shannon.
Yeah.
Are you available to meet tomorrow at 1 o'clock?
I think so, but let me send me an email and I will get back to you tonight. Okay?
Yeah, because I have everything that I want to talk to you about.
Gotcha.
So maybe it won't be long, maybe like 40 minutes.